Hi, I'm Joshua Farnsworth. Welcome to my woodworking school. In this video, I'll continue my hand tool guides by talking about which layout, marking, and measuring tools you need for woodworking and which ones you don't. Precision is key to getting tight-fitting joints, whether you're using hand tools or power tools. And layout, marking, and measuring tools like these squares, dividers, and marking gauges help you ensure accuracy. For example, it's difficult to cut a tight-fitting mortise and tenon table leg joint like this one without accurate layout lines to guide you. Here in my woodworking school, I have dozens of these tools, so I've really had a lot of experience in seeing which tools I like best. But more importantly, I've seen which tools my students really like the best. And I found some really affordable options that I feel actually work great, which is helpful for students who are on a tight budget. But it can be a bit overwhelming to understand all the different tools required for laying out, marking, and measuring your projects. So hopefully I can make it a little less confusing for you with this video. And before I get started, again, I just want to quickly let you know that this video actually goes along with my article on choosing these layout, marking, measuring tools. And in the notes section below this video, you'll find a link to this guide and all my other tool buying guide articles. My tool guides have a lot more detail than I have time to share in these videos. And also in my guides, I mention specific brand names and models of tools that I prefer, which I typically don't like to do in these videos because tool quality can change over time, and my opinion about those brands can also change. And to be honest, it's a lot easier to change an article than it is to change a whole new video every time my opinion changes on a tool maker, or if I find a new tool maker. I'll also be making my videos for all my other guides on buying hand tools and power tools. So if you subscribe to my YouTube channel below this video, you'll be notified immediately when those videos are released. Because there are so many layout, marking, and measuring tools to cover, I'll be breaking this particular video into two parts so you don't get overwhelmed. So make sure you don't miss part 2. All right, let's jump into the tools. Squares have been around for thousands of years and are an essential tool for determining if your board's edge is perfectly 90 degrees to its face. That's really important because you want your joints to fit together tightly. Squares are also used for making 90-degree marks on your boards. Squares come in many different sizes and styles, so I won't mention every type in this video. Just the types that I use here in my workshop. Combination squares are a more modern style of metal square, and I find them very useful in my workshop for many tasks. The bar of the square slides back and forth to give you different lengths for measuring and marking your boards. The bearing surface of the square allows you to scribe both a 90-degree line and a 45-degree line. Double squares are like combination squares, but without the 45-degree bearing surface. A combination square also works great as a depth gauge, for example, when you're chopping a mortise. It's also useful for finding the center of boards. Just as a little side tip, to find a board's center, I adjust the combination square close to what appears to be the center, and then I mark from both sides, flipping it end for end. And I make marks with a pencil or a marking knife. Right in between those two marks is the center of the board. Combination squares are also convenient because they're usually purchased new and are usually accurate if you buy them from a reputable maker. Vintage squares often need some work to get them back into square. I'll talk about how to test a square for accuracy in just a minute, but I recommend that my students buy both a 6-inch combination square and a 12-inch combination square. I've found that those two sizes cover most of the tasks that I encounter when I'm building furniture. As I mentioned, I'm always on the lookout for affordable tools that are also quality and accurate, and I've been able to find a couple of combination squares that meet those criteria. I've bought a bunch of these for my school, and I have yet to find one that was out of square. This particular brand runs about $15 for the 6-inch size and about $17 for the 12-inch size. No, they don't slide quite as smoothly as my $90 combination square does, but squareness is the most important factor to me personally. Like I mentioned, I won't talk about the brand names of my favorite squares in this video in case the quality of these squares changes, but you can find the brands that I recommend in my article. If you're looking to go more traditional, then a tri-square may be a great option for you. Tri-squares are quite common on the antique market, but they usually require a good deal of filing to get them back into being square. Shop-made wooden tri-squares are much easier to get back in square, but they do require a good deal of time to make them out of wood. It's a trade-off, of course. When buying a vintage tri-square, it's a good idea to test it out for squareness, and here's how I do it. First, I line the square up along the edge of a straight board, and I draw a fine line along the inner side of the blade. I flip the square over and try to draw a line over the same line, again with the inner side of the blade. If the lines line up, then it's square. I also like to test the outer side of the blade. If the tri-square isn't square, then either move on or you can try to negotiate a lower price, because it really does take a good deal of filing time to get them back into square. So what about new tri-squares? Well, I've found that many new tri-squares are actually out of square and usually too expensive. That's why I recommend to either buy combination squares or look for antique tri-squares and fix them up. If you're going to spend time squaring a tri-square up, you might as well get a superior antique tri-square. So are you tired of hearing me say square yet? If you're interested in having me release a video on rehabbing an antique tri-square, let me know in the comments section below and I'll consider that. I use framing squares in situations when I don't need quite as much accuracy, like when I'm cross-cutting rough lumber or when I'm doing rough carpentry. For example, I just recently used my framing squares a lot a couple weeks ago when I laid out a bunch of stringers for the new front stairs I built for my house. You may also have seen me using a framing square in my recent video on building a Viking camp chair. Framing squares are also very useful in timber framing. Students in our timber framing classes have certainly learned just how useful a framing square can be for laying out timber frame joints. While I don't use it for really accurate furniture joints, it's still important to have your framing square be in square. I've had good luck with this accurate new framing square and also with this vintage framing square. But due to the outdoor environment where framing squares are mostly used, they can easily get dropped or bumped and can go out of square. If it's out of square less than 1/16 of an inch or so, it can certainly be brought back into square with a simple trick using a metal punch. In my article, I've linked to some tutorials on how to do this. Sliding T-bevel squares, or sliding bevels, or bevel squares as they're called, are often useful for holding and transferring an angle. I prefer to use these in laying out dovetail joints rather than using a dovetail marker. You probably only need one sliding bevel square. My antique rosewood and brass sliding bevel squares don't have any brand names on them, but I really love them. They're quality made, and they're gorgeous, and they don't loosen up until you want them to. On these squares, the blade shouldn't move after you lock it down. That's important. Otherwise, the angle will be changed. I like this type of face locking mechanism, as you can see here. I also really like this style of butt locking mechanism. As far as antique bevel squares go, the butt locking bevel squares are usually in higher demand and hence more expensive. So if you're on a tight budget, go for the face locking style like this one. But there have been some manufacturers that have made some affordable new butt-locking bevel squares, which I have tried out, and I do like them. I've listed some of these bevel squares in the accompanying article that I mentioned. They run about $25, which I feel is a good value. I own several bevel gauges that have a face lever mechanism. While they do hold tight, I don't like them quite as much because the lever can get in the way and you have to kind of fidget with the back nut to get the lever to point out of the way. But if you find one like this one for under $10 or around that, go ahead and buy it. They're good. Now for a warning of what not to buy. Steer clear of new bevel squares that look like this with a knurled brass nut. It won't tighten well at all, as you can see here. I've heard some people suggest that you can spend time modifying this type of bevel square, but if you can get a beautiful antique bevel square for the same price or less, why spend time messing with a bad one like this one? And what about the really, really expensive sliding bevel squares? I've seen some over $150. And while they're gorgeous, and I'd certainly accept one as a gift and use it, I just couldn't rationalize spending that much money on something that a $10 to $25 tool handles perfectly. I'd rather spend it on a nice hand plane. But to be fair, I've never tried a super expensive bevel square, so I may be able to be convinced. Dividers, or compass as they're often called, are used for taking and laying out precise measurements without ever having to look at a number. You can also use them for circumscribing circles or arcs, like when laying out a profile on a custom molding. I also use them a lot for stepping off a bunch of dovetails, as you may have seen in my recent video on laying out dovetails with just a few affordable tools. In my opinion, I feel like it's good to have at least one pair of dividers. If you only want to start out buying one pair of dividers, start out with a 6-inch size. If you can afford it, then also look for a large one around 9 to 12 inches and maybe a small one 3 to 4 inches. I find them all useful. Custom hand-forged dividers like this are the most expensive, whether you buy them new or used. Antique forged dividers are often collectible, which leads to higher prices. And I've even seen some new dividers for a staggering $200. Again, I don't feel like this is the best place to spend your tool budget unless you have a lot of money. A higher price doesn't always mean that a tool will work better. In fact, my favorite style of dividers can be purchased new or vintage at a very reasonable price. I prefer this spring style of dividers with a micro adjust wheel. Why? Because if they get bumped, they bounce right back to the measurement that you set them at. The forged dividers and screw style of dividers like these, they don't have this feature, and if they get bumped, you have to start over. And I find those styles a bit tough to get accurate in the first place. I purchased these antique spring dividers for around $10 or $20, and in searching for affordable dividers for my woodworking school, I discovered these really great dividers, which are quite similar to my antique version. And I think I paid about $8 for each of them. The price has since gone up a few dollars, but it's still a great value. And in my article, I've listed a couple of other great spring dividers that I own, that I've used in my school here in the same price range. In part 2 of this video, I'll be covering more cool hand tools for laying out, measuring, and marking, including marking gauges, mortise gauges, marking knives, straight edges, winding sticks, and more. So make sure you subscribe to my channel so you can be notified immediately when the next video is released. And as always, if you have any questions, be sure to ask them in the comment section below this video. And while you're down there, why not give this video a thumbs up? It only takes you a second to do, and it helps me out. And I'd like to say thanks for hanging out at my shop. Hi, I'm Joshua Farnsworth. If you like this video, I've got a whole bunch of other free woodworking videos and articles at my website, which you can visit by clicking right here. You'll go to woodandshop.com, Down here, if you click, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. And over here are some really great other videos that I think you might like to check out.